guys, welcome to Crank It Up. I'm Jim Price, and over the next two videos, I'll be talking about my top 12 cards with interesting wording and their implications. Admittedly, these videos will appeal to some more than others, because they tend to get into the lower level details, but I do think that there is a lot that can be learned by examining these things. Plus, many times the nuances are lost on players, and these nuances can have some pretty wide-ranging consequences. In a card text game, there are written rules, but cards are also rules, and the intersection of the two is the game itself. This is exciting and terrifying. It's exciting because it offers near-endless possibilities, but also terrifying because cards do what they do. This is an area where I'm heavily influenced by both my programming background and my game design background. In programming, there are requirements and code where code implements the requirements. Every programmer goes through those moments where what you wrote isn't what you intended, and it usually results in defects, which you can fix. But cards aren't changed so easily, and when a card does something questionable, it tends to stay. To highlight why this is important, I wanted to give two examples before I get to the actual list. Last week, I talked about how for Difference Engine, the end of the turn wasn't meant to be the literal end of the turn, but the draw phase, and the card was retroactively interpreted to its literal wording. This is the rare good case. In another case, consider On Guard. The latter half reads, draw a card. You may play an extra action. Well, right at the end of development, On Guard inverted the order of drawing a card and playing an action. Does this matter? Yes. You might be thinking, if this card is played outside your turn, the extra action is immediate before the drawn card, which means you can't play what you draw, making it harder to chain. And that would be partially true, but also an edge case. The truth is, by strict definition of the immediate rule, the extra action would always be immediate, because text follows. And this kills the fun of Musketeers, so much so that we collectively got it reversed to draw the card first. Ironically, the intent of the immediate rule would later be called into question, but you can see the impact of rearranging two independent clauses. So let's get to that list. This video will be split into two parts, because it would be too long for 1 week. This week is definitely the lighter of the two, and I'm looking forward to seeing Vespert and a few others have a field day with the last card next week. Let's start with an easy one as a warm-up. Budding. Budding has you choose a minion in play, then search your deck for a copy of it and draw it. The key phrase is that you can search for any minion, not just your minion. But why would you? Conceptually, this could be interesting if you played Critter Cube and wanted to search for that minion, but you actually can't. Because of the Viking rules, if you were to search for a card in your deck that someone else owned, they would draw it rather than you, which is why you would never actually do this. But that rule did not exist at the time of the first expansion, not that it would really be possible anyway. I am starting with this one because what is honestly a typo is actually an opportunity, and an opportunity to reflect as well. Something that could have been cool down the line, but historically became a card that is hurt by its own rules. Consider this. If you manage the rare feat to get someone else's card into your deck, which is 40 cards, wouldn't you want to search for it? It's disappointing, but at least Budding gets the opposite scenario that people rarely seem to envision. A card you own, but don't control. For example, Betrothed. You can target it because it is any minion, but when you search for it, you own it, so you draw it. Admittedly, the killer plants have enough ways to get threes, but another sneaky squire could definitely be useful, since you could queue up a chain later. Budding, to me, is a typo that turned into an interesting case study on future-proofing and the unintended consequences of rules being added later. Number 11 is Augmentation. Some people may think that I'm pointing out that Augmentation lasts until the end of your turn, rather than the turn, but that's just silly, even though Smash Up confirms this in a clarification, which is even sillier. No, the more interesting thing is the fact that the power can be given to any minion, not just your own. And it's terminal, so this is for breaking a base. Why give the power to any minion? This actually started a precedent that has mostly been followed, but some cards cannot give power to other players, and I feel like that is correct. Why give power to other players? There are only two reasons that could have occurred at the core set. One is to manipulate positioning among other players. When the power doesn't matter to you, but would matter to someone else, giving it to another player is meaningful, especially to the player flipping the table. It's strategic, but potentially king-making. The other reason would be to compete on ninja bases, but I just don't see that happening. You need 14 power already, and who competes on those bases? In the core set, they are terraforming targets. but the precedent was set, and it always makes me wonder why some cards obey it and others don't. For me, it either needs to be thematic or make mechanical sense in the context of the faction. For example, it makes sense for things best not known because of Old Man Jenkins, and you are drawing madness anyway, so crazy is expected. Number 10 is Pumping Iron of the Elves. Now if you follow this channel, you know I love the Elves, and this is a very intriguing card when done properly, but it has some particular word choices that can make it one of the worst cards in the game. For Pumping Iron to be effective, you need a dogpile base where a player is forced to get power there no matter what minion is chosen, especially when the power location among players doesn't matter. Pumping Iron is meant to be a +5. There is plenty of +3 cards already, and +5 makes up for the effort. But if you know the secret to Pumping Iron, it breaks down considerably in the Munchkin context. It directs the first player to choose a minion to gain +2. Well, that player should almost always choose a monster, which is a minion. This increases the monster's power, which increases the breakpoint, and it is usually easy to guess which base is the target. This means that Pumping Iron can amount to -2 and +3 for a net gain of 1 temporary power, and that's just sad. The first time I did that to someone, he was furious, but it's completely legal. But is it intentional? This honestly seems like an oversight, because elves are all about interacting with other players, and monsters have no player. It should really say, any player's minion, to specifically avoid monsters. Munchkin feels like it was created in isolation, so it's very curious how this happened, but if you know this trick, you can really turn the tables on the elf player because monsters are minions too. That monster and minion duality is at the heart of number 9, Boots of Running Really Fast. This is much more subtle in that it is play on a minion. All treasures that are minion modifies are the same, but specifically, this makes Boots of Running Really Fast one of the most powerful treasures because it means you can move other players' minions. This itself isn't new, but doing so as a talent, where you repeatedly control the fate of this minion, is unprecedented. But it also works on monsters for the same reason, and this is one area where I'd love to know the original intent. Because controlling some of the higher power monsters is really powerful. Unless you can destroy Night of the Living Dead, you have to deal with a mobile brick wall who makes it very difficult to burst, especially in the Munchkin-only context. Just moving it on to stall, then move it off to finish it and keep it on the board all game long. This is really strong. If you think about other cards that flat out move any minion, there aren't many, and the faction tends to be known for movement. This is a very powerful tool as a result, and again, I'm really curious if this was meant to be more like Traveling Elf. Like Augmentation targeting anyone, and Boots being playable on anyone, the question of intended targets is at the heart of number 8. The Cyborg Apes have 6 card designs for minion modifiers. Without looking, which 2 are required to be played exclusively on your minion? One is obvious and makes sense, which is Monkey on Your Back, to prevent it from being a normal destruction card. The nature of destroying another player's minion requires it to be on your own, because otherwise you just kill it immediately. But what's the other? Not the ones that grant power, not the one that grants extreme power, not the one that grants incredible sustainability. No, it's missing uplink. Why this one? I doubt you play it on someone else's minion anyway, because you have Baboom, Cyberback, and to a lesser extent Furious George, and you want stacking anyway for juiced up. But if that's the other one that is required to be played on your minion, this means you could play shielding on another player's minion to protect them from their own actions. This is incredibly powerful as it's an automatic disenchant, but also stops them from powering themselves up. This really feels like an oversight, and against certain factions can be really powerful. But what was the intent? I doubt we'll ever know, but this is definitely a curious placement. The final entry this week is Bear Hug. Bear Hug is a famous example of a card that stands out in its wording and has been the subject of many debates, even in my own group. For a long time, it was unspoken, but the modern rules specify the idea of credit for an effect in the definition of effect. This is how Bear Hug is able to get around Awesome Guy, because Awesome Guy only blocks other players, and you are the one doing the destruction. But there are 2 main takeaways here. First, it seems arbitrary to make a distinction between players and their cards. I would have thought that players was the superset of minions and actions, just like players' cards is. But there is a tiny window of failed protection that slips in through because of Bear Hug. Admittedly, I don't know how you word things to account for protection from just minions or actions if you consolidate a player and their cards. But the easier thing would have been to change Bear Hug so that the players choose the victim and the Bear Hug player destroys said victim. This is because of the second takeaway. This card is clearly a mistake because of Field of Honor. It's clear that Field of Honor was meant to award the Bear Cavalry player, because if a base is going to reward a player, it's almost always the faction itself. But it doesn't. The victim gets the VP here because they did the destroy. And there's no way that this could have been the intention, but it's how the rules evolved and created a niche edge case where two cards seem like they could protect you, but only one does. And that's a big theme that we'll see next week when I continue this topic. I'll be delving further into some pretty heavy situations, but hopefully these examples make you think about what cards actually say versus what you think they say, and that wordings can have unintended consequences. This is definitely true next week. Care to guess what those cards might be? Let me know in the comments. And if you have experienced any of these edge cases, be sure to mention it. Thanks for watching. Be sure to like and subscribe. Let's shut it down.